So, I wanted to talk a little bit today about my personal autism story, my journey into diagnosis. Um, in school, I was very awkward. Um, I didn't quite understand how to be accepted by others. Um, I would try to imitate other students, pick up their mannerisms, and do funny things that they would do. Um, but it always kind of backfired on me. I was bullied severely in middle school. The way my earlier school was set up is elementary, and then intermediate was fifth and sixth. Um, they later added fourth grade to that. And then junior high was seventh and eighth, and then high school. So in intermediate and junior high, I was severely bullied. Not just by the students either, but by some of the teachers, specifically my sixth grade teacher. I did get held back in sixth grade. Um, and I had that same teacher both years. And she's actually the one who gave me my nickname in school. Because there were two Shannons in class, and at the time my last name was Hickey. I was given my dad's last name at birth. I later took my mom's last name. But so I used to sign my papers S. Hickey, and the teacher, when she was passing papers back one day, she said Shicky, and got a laugh out of everyone. And from that day forward, everyone started calling me that, and the name even followed me from that school to the high school, even though I was in a different district, because of my younger brother. He told everyone about it, and it really, I really hated it, honestly. But in fifth grade, I had a psych evaluation done at the school. This psych eval. I managed to get a copy of this last year when I began my autism journey. A lot of the things the eval said was Shannon is described as difficult to motivate and as having few friends. According to his teacher, he complained that others bother him, but does not recognize that he often instigates the problem. I'm not sure how I instigated the problem, but that seems to be a common thread among many autistics, especially late diagnosed autistics in childhood. Some of the behavioral observations. Shannon handled manipulatives such as blocks, puzzle pieces, awkwardly, and initially used trial and error to attempt to solve these problems. As he realized this did not work, he then began to study the models and to become more organized, planning his strategy. Later on, down in the same area, it says, he then stated he was thinking about becoming a comic book artist, a policeman, or a school psychologist. The latter he wanted to do as having lots of problems and said, I missed on it. The latter he wanted to do because he wants to work with children who have problems. He sees himself as having lots of problems and said, I don't have many friends. He mentioned several children who make fun of him for his clothes and tease him about his last name. And then it went on to go into the testing scores and everything here. Discussion. Shannon's overall cognitive ability, as measured on the Kaufman scales KABC, is solidly within the mid-average range when compared to age peers. There were no significant differences between the sequential and the simultaneous processing skills scores. He had a relative strength for his age on a task requiring analogous reasoning and a relative weakness on the task of spatial memory. All other subtests were within the average ranges. The developmental tests of visual motor integration, a pencil and paper task requiring the copying of increasingly complex geometrical forms, was difficult for Shannon. He had no significant strengths on any of the subtests and demonstrated weak spatial organization, visual analysis, and slow psychomotor speed. But in the integration of perception and coordination, he had no errors on the subtests, but worked very slowly on the WISC-3. His errors on the subtests, or his processing speed index scale score of 83 placed him at the 13th percentile, and indicates a processing speed at the low end of the average range. The above findings were somewhat surprising, as Shannon is a good artist. His draw a person was extremely well detailed and somewhat above average for his age. This would further indicate that his visual perception, fine motor coordination generally is accurate, but he is so meticulous it takes him a long time to draw, and he writes slowly. He may need more time on writing and copying assignments in the classroom in order to complete his work successfully. His reading skills are at about the 60th percentile for his age and are at approximately a mid-5th comprehension and mid-6th grade level letter word identification. So I was ahead on reading skills a little bit. When was this? This was done. So my comprehension was right on track, because this was done in March of 94. But my letter word identification was like a year advanced. The results of this assessment, including the student interview and all the motor data collected as part of this evaluation, suggest that lack of motivation, not poor self-concept, is a major factor in Shannon's academic performance. Shannon states right up front that he hates to study, hardly ever does it, and does not complete his homework because he likes watching TV better. He recognizes that he has poor social skills with his peers, and this seems to be a bigger determination of his self-concept. Some interactions he describes with peers suggest some social immaturity on his part. It's possible that Shannon's lack of motivation stems from some depression. He strikes this examiner as a child who needs someone to talk with regarding improved peer relations, feelings about parents' divorce, and his grandmother's death. The issue of homework and setting contingencies, i.e. TV privileges, occurring after completion of assignments, and other recommendations regarding motivation will need to be discussed at the upcoming multidisciplinary conference. Use of a buddy system or peer mentor might be helpful in improving peer relationships as well. She did go on to diagnose me with generalized anxiety disorder, which has been done 3 times throughout my life. 5th grade, once in my 20s, when I got my IQ test done, which I scored above average on all my IQ testing. And then again in my 30s by my primary physician. And this has led me to feel that a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder is really a cop-out. And learning more about it as a counselor in training, it's caused me to really see it for what it is. It's a placeholder diagnosis, and most clinicians don't go back to it and try to find the real reason for the anxiety. They just give their stamp and send you on your way with medication. So I got this. This was done in 5th grade, but about a year ago, when I began to really understand that I might be autistic. I remembered that I had this psych evaluation done, and I went to the school district that this was done at and asked for a copy. They gave it to me, and I read over it, and I highlighted the areas of significance, and I began taking some self-assessments, online self-assessments, such as the Aspie quiz, such as the autism quotient, RADS-R, CAT-Q, all those. And I was scoring high on the autism side of things with that. And we were at a cookout at my friend's house, and his wife asked me if my son was autistic, because she had a friend whose son was autistic and had the same speech mannerisms as my son. And that got me wondering. We eventually managed to seek out a diagnosis for my son. He was evaluated last January and then given the diagnosis right away. They didn't really need to do any scoring to tell them that he was autistic. They did go through the scoring system that they had to officially give him the diagnosis, but they knew right away he was autistic. And they referred me to ISU, Illinois State University, I believe. Yeah, Illinois State University in Bloomington Normal, because their medical school was doing adults autism evaluations at a fraction of the cost, because students were performing them and getting signed off by professional psychiatrists. So I called and went through the process of getting on the schedule. I went through my DSM-5 and all the criteria for autism spectrum disorder. I made a really thick, really in-depth packet of all my traits that I've exhibited. I worked on it with my wife, relayed those back to the criteria, and put the criteria next to each trait. And I had it in APA format. And when I went in there, I handed the evaluator the packet, and she was looking it over, and she got all excited because it was an APA format and everything, and now it made her job even more easier. And I even included several references to official papers that, even though some criteria was iffy on if it met or not, I related it back to these professionally researched papers to show that no, it does connect. And so in May, I received my official autism diagnosis. And let me see here. I'll read this to you real quick. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But I'll start with diagnostic impressions and go from there. Shannon is a 41-year-old master's student who was referred for a comprehensive autism evaluation. He enjoys watching movies and spending time with his family. He describes himself as intelligent, attentive, and caring. Shannon came to the clinic with concerns about himself, with symptoms of autism spectrum disorder that are impacting his everyday life. He reported that social interactions are difficult for him, as he has difficulty with identifying when he has offended others, being taken advantage of, and understanding figurative speech. Shannon reported that he has had these difficulties throughout his life and sought a formal evaluation for autism. Throughout the evaluation, Shannon exhibited several symptoms that are consistent with autism spectrum disorder. While Shannon was able to maintain a reciprocal conversation with the clinician, these interactions were largely led by the clinician. Shannon made eye contact, but it was routinely awkward. In addition, Shannon has several fixed interests in movies and TV shows which grossly encompass his communication skills. I'll talk about this here in a minute. Shannon had difficulty explaining various emotions and how he can identify when he is experiencing those emotions. Throughout the evaluation, Shannon struggled with imaginative play and relied on scenes from movies to tell a story. Given the results of the clinical interview, ADOS-2, and self-report measures, Shannon meets the criteria for autism spectrum disorder. And then it goes into the DSM-5 diagnosis. DSM-5 diagnosis 299.00 F84.0. Autism spectrum disorder requiring support without accompanying intellectual or language impairment. So level 1. Low support needs. Shannon is creative, friendly, and intelligent. He enjoys spending time with his family, watching movies, and listening to podcasts. Shannon was open about his experiences with bullying and his drive to work with children who might have similar stories. Shannon meets the criteria for autism and shared some of the difficulties associated with the developmental disorder. In addition, Shannon also has several strengths: detailed-oriented, empathetic, strong work ethic, adaptable, that have been instrumental in his success as an author, teacher, and loving parent. The recommendations listed below are intended to be used as a tool to help address some of the concerns Shannon reported, while he also continues to use his strengths to accomplish his goals. Recommendations: Shannon reported that he enjoys reading and educating himself about various topics. It is recommended that Shannon read some books such as Uniquely Human by Barry President to help him understand more about autism. I listened to the audiobook. I found it exceptional. I loved that book. I would recommend it to anybody who suspects that they're autistic. Shannon reported that he often has intrusive thoughts when he is dysregulated. It is recommended that Shannon pursue individual therapy to help address his intrusive thoughts and apply effective coping strategies when dysregulated. Shannon reported that he struggles with understanding social cues and social interactions are usually difficult. So it is recommended that Shannon pursue services to help address any specific concerns he has surrounding social interactions. Shannon reported that he has several social media accounts and he uses his platform to discuss autism and bullying. It is recommended that Shannon seeks support groups via social media. This could be an effective coping strategy, which I have done. I did prior to receiving my evaluation. Here's the sample scores that show what my scores are being tested against. Let you guys take a look at that. And then here are my official scores. I'm not going to read through them all. Then at the bottom it shows the diagnostic criteria. It starts with it and what the assessor observed during the assessment of me that meet the criteria. So for social communication and social interaction deficits, which you have to meet all of them in order to receive the diagnosis. A1, deficits in social emotional reciprocity. I met. Shannon demonstrated limited interest in the thoughts and ideas of his social partner during the ADOS-2 administration, as he only asked one question. However, he demonstrated the ability to maintain conversation through answering questions and offering responses. Although Shannon was able to maintain a back and forth conversation, the interaction was generally awkward and largely led by the clinician. Then for A2, deficits in nonverbal communication, communicative behaviors used for social interaction, the evaluator said, throughout the assessment day, Shannon effectively used descriptive, e.g. brushing teeth, conventional, nodding and shaking head, and instrumental pointing gestures. However, they were excessive and awkward in nature. Shannon made some eye contact throughout the assessment day. These interactions were at times awkward, as he often stared at the clinician or did not make eye contact for an extended amount of time. Further, it seemed that many of these interactions were mechanical in nature. So I met that. I met criteria 3, deficits in development, maintenance, and understanding of relationships. During the ADOS-2, Shannon demonstrated some understanding of social relationships. Although he had difficulty offering insight into his role in such relationships, he was able to identify most emotions, but struggled to describe how each emotion felt and how to identify when he was feeling the emotion. Shannon also demonstrated lack of understanding surrounding his own friendships, as he was unable to differentiate between a friend and an acquaintance. So I met all of that A criteria. And now for B criteria, I met all that restrictive, repetitive patterns. So B1 is stereotyped or repetitive motor movements, use of objects or speech. Throughout the assessment, Shannon displayed finger tapping, fidgeting with his fingers, and fidgeting with his bracelets on his wrists. Shannon's speech was somewhat odd in tone. No other stereotyped or repetitive behaviors were observed. However, Shannon reported that he flaps his hands and repeats unintelligible sounds over and over. This is mainly when overstimulated. Criteria B2, insistence on sameness and flexible adherence to routines, ritualized patterns of verbal or nonverbal behavior. Shannon transitioned well between activities during the assessment. He had some difficulty with the clinician's attempt to change the topic of conversation when discussing movies. He would stop talking about movies for a short amount of time. However, he eventually resumed. Shannon also reported that he has specific routines, i.e. the order of putting on his bracelets, how he polishes his nails, etc. That must be done the same way every time in order for him to proceed with his day. Criterion B3, highly restricted fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity or focus. Shannon was highly interested in movies and television shows during the assessment, as he named multiple titles and talked about various scenes that he enjoyed. So, my special interest is stories. I've long had a love of stories. Um, Early on, it was TV and movies and comic books. Then it became, when it moved into reading, books, magazines, YouTube videos, TikTok videos, Instagram videos, anything with a story, I really latched onto. And it was even better if it was a good story, a story I could relate to or reflect upon. So it doesn't really have to be TV and movies, but that's where a lot of it comes from, especially in childhood, was TV and movies. So B4, hyper or hyporeactivity to sensory input or unusual interest in sensory aspects of the environment. Shannon appeared to enjoy fidgeting with his hands during the assessment. No other sensory-seeking behaviors were observed during the assessment. Shannon reported that he is especially sensitive to loud noises and other surprises, which I met. Criterion C, symptoms present in early developmental period. Shannon reported concerns beginning as a young child. As I said, I was bullied severely in childhood and adolescence by both peers and teachers. I had the fixed interest on TVs and movies, stories in particular, in childhood. Very socially awkward. So I met that. Criterion D, symptoms cause clinically significant impairment in important areas of current functioning. Symptoms cause significant impairment in Shannon's ability to understand and maintain social relationships in the home, school, and work environment. So I met that. And I met E. These disturbances are not better explained by intellectual disability, intellectual developmental disorder, or global developmental delay. Intellectual disability and autism spectrum disorder frequently co-occur. To make comorbid diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder and intellectual disability, social communication should be below that expected for general developmental level. So I didn't meet that because I had managed to make it into a master's program without many, if any, accommodations. But once I received this diagnosis, I got in touch with the accommodations department at my university. My university I go to Northwestern University. It's often considered the Ivy League of the Midwest. It's a top 10 university. It was the only graduate program that I applied to, because it was the only one that offered an online path to licensure in clinical counseling. And I went through the interview process. I got accepted. I'm getting ready to start my second year in the master's program now, waiting for practicum placement. But the accommodations I received were, I'm allowed to use a script, especially during presentations. I can read from a script. This also allows me to communicate via the chat feature in Zoom when we have Zoom classes. Sorry, there's a vehicle in the background. I don't know if you guys can hear it. But if I'm having a day where I'm nonverbal, I can communicate via the chat. This is because of slow processing, especially when I'm interrupted. It really decreases my processing speed, and so I can communicate much better via text communication. So I can utilize the chat feature as part of that use of scripting. I'm also allowed extra time on exams. So they're starting me out at time and a half. So if a normal exam is 90 minutes, then I get 120 minutes to complete it. Um, and I feel I need to get evaluated for dyscalculia, which is a math-based disorder, much like dyslexia. I have never been good at math at all. Um, I barely passed it during my um, associate's degree program. I had to get a lot of help to pass it. I was studying algebra just constantly, and my best friend was tutoring me in it. Um, and the instructor, he saw how much work I was putting in and still unable to pass the exams. But because of all the extra work I was doing, um, studying, doing exercises, getting all my homework done, just unable to pass the exams. He went ahead and passed me. He gave me extra credit for all the extra effort I was putting in. And because my major really doesn't have anything to do with algebra, um, that was a huge factor, because it shouldn't have really even been a criteria for graduation anyway. But because of the way the laws are about education, where you have to get a generalized education and all this, and be adept in multiple different subjects, even if they don't relate to your major, it is what it is. But last night, my daughter asked me for help on her algebra homework, and it had to do with rational numbers and integers and whole numbers and all that. This was an area that it always confused me. I never did well at all. I tried helping her, I really did, but I was worried that by the help I was giving her was actually causing her to get the questions wrong. So I did refer her to her notes, and she's a smart girl. She's a very brilliant student, always on the honor roll and stuff. So I had no doubt in my mind that she would probably be better able to get through the assignment with a passing grade than on her own than if I were to try and help her. And this goes with dates and time too. I am very I don't see it as time blindness. It's more like I don't understand how much time it's going to take to do something. And so often when I have an appointment or something like that, the entire day going up to that appointment, I will do absolutely nothing. I will arrive to the appointment over an hour early to make sure that I don't miss it. In school, whenever I was going through my undergrad at a physical school, I would arrive to my first class of the day over an hour early just to make sure I wasn't late. Lateness causes me anxiety. Dates, I can't really keep track of dates. But in my mind, I can remember when something happened compared to what I was doing at the time. So, like, I know that 2001, I was a senior in high school because I went to Lincoln Community High School. I was in study hall when the planes hit the towers on 9/11. I remember that it was during this time when I used to babysit my older brother's girlfriend's daughter. I also worked at the truck stop at this time. Um, and so I see things in relation to other things. Um, I can't place exact dates or exact addresses or exact times. I have to go by how it relates to something else. Um, so I do feel I need to be assessed for dyscalculia. And that's just a few of the things. Now, before I actually began to truly feel that I was autistic, a few years back, I was watching a video or something, and it had to do with autism, and it made me think, and I was relating to it quite a bit, but I wasn't sure. So I asked my wife, I mentioned that, I wondered if I was autistic because I was relating a lot with autistic characteristics and everything. I can generally tell when someone's autistic um, just by interacting with them. Um, Even if they themselves don't know or if it's not widely known, I can generally tell. There's like that. Um, we know when somebody else shares um, shares features that you have. You generally know. Um, so I asked her what she thought, and she just kind of blew it off because at this time we didn't know much about autism. We didn't know that this was also back when Asperger's was an official diagnosis. Um, we weren't very educated on autism. We just knew how it had been displayed in the media and all this. So I didn't really pursue it much. And my freshman year of college, I began to understand that I was likely had borderline personality disorder. I was watching a Med Circle video. Dr. Romney was talking about the disorder, and I had this on in the background while I was working on something else. And everything she was describing, all the diagnostic criteria and everything, and all the traits that she was describing, it really caught my attention. And I transferred my focus from what I was working on to this video because it felt like she was talking about me. I met more than the minimum criteria. And I began learning more and more about BPD and everything. And when I got my DSM-5, that was the first thing I looked into was the diagnostic criteria. And I wrote out exactly how I met the criteria and everything. And I do. I meet more than the minimum criteria. I don't meet all of the criteria for BPD, but I do meet more than the minimum criteria required for a diagnosis. I just haven't seen an actual evaluator about it to get the official diagnosis. But I do know that I have BPD. And I was discussing this with one of my psychology professors at the time. She was someone I consider a mentor. I had her do the foreword in my first book for me. I had a lot of classes with her in my undergrad. And she told me she had been thinking about it and she didn't think I had BPD because I was too self-aware. There is a little more known about BPD than there is autism, but they're both about the same level where there's this huge stigma around them and not a lot of research. But as I researched and looked at things and talked to people and watched videos of people who have been diagnosed with BPD, I began to realize a lot of people with BPD are extremely self-aware, especially those who are autistic, and there is a high comorbidity between autism and BPD, and that's due to something called the what was it? Intense world theory of autism, saying that things that might be traumatic to, or that are not considered traumatic to the general population, are often considered traumatic for autistics because of the way we perceive the world, our sensory system, and everything else. Something very minor to a neurotypical would be considered traumatic for a neurodivergent. And so there is a huge comorbidity between autism and BPD. So that was the first thing that I began to research and understand about myself, was that I have BPD, borderline personality disorder. I have not been officially diagnosed with it because most of the therapists around here don't specialize in it. There is a huge stigma around it, and misdiagnosis is likely, especially in men. Most men are 40% more likely to receive a misdiagnosis of bipolar rather than borderline personality disorder. And that's across the country, not just in my area. And I am one of those statistics. In my 20s, whenever I got the diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder, when I got my psych evaluation or my IQ test done, the therapist, she gave the diagnosis of bipolar type 2, manic depression. But the more I learned about that diagnosis, the more I realized I don't relate to that. I don't have those features. My mood swings aren't like, don't cover a long period of time. They're more short bursts. I can be happy 1 minute, enraged the next, or depressed the next, and then go back to being happy. And my mood shifts in that way. So I have not been officially diagnosed with BPD, but this was what led to the autism diagnosis. I was on TikTok, and I started getting a lot of videos in my feed from autistic creators, and I was heavily relating to their experiences, to their journeys, their bullying, their sensory perceptions, everything. I was relating to it. And that's when I began doing research. I began taking the self-assessments, and all this, and began to recognize myself as self-diagnosed autistic. Self-diagnosis is valid. I'm proof that it's valid because later I did receive an official diagnosis of autism. So that was my autism journey. I do feel that at some point I would like to get officially assessed for borderline personality disorder. Right now, I'm comfortable in knowing that I have BPD without getting the official diagnosis. My wife, she's researched it a lot too. She's a nurse. She's watched videos about it, read articles about it, looked at the diagnostic criteria. She agrees that I have BPD because I meet the criteria. So I'm comfortable in that, confident in that. I did seek out an official diagnosis for autism because I felt that though self-diagnosis is valid, in the eyes of the community, it's valid. in the eyes of the public, it's not. And I desperately needed accommodations if I wanted to finish my master's program. And in order to get those accommodations, I needed the diagnosis. And so I went and got assessed and was diagnosed. And I received the accommodations that I needed because I did need more time on exams, because I would have to read questions multiple times in order to truly understand what they were saying. And because I have trouble speaking in public, as you've seen in this video, I'm not editing this video at all, which is why it's going to be so long. As you've seen in this video, I've had to take processing time throughout my speaking. In order to truly understand what I'm saying. That processing speed is kind of slow, and it's slow but fast. There's so many things being processed at once in my brain. It slows everything else down. So yeah, this was my autism journey. I'm going to go ahead and upload it as is. Let me know if you guys can relate to anything I've said here. Share your stories in the comments below. Take care.